So over the last few months, our channel has been covering the topic of the Great Reset pretty frequently. And well, in all fairness, a good number of it has been a lot of speculation. Now granted, a lot of that speculation may prove to be true. After all, a lot of the content that we recorded on the Great Reset 6 months ago ended up becoming true as time went on.
By 2030, we could see a housing economy in which federal, state, and local government will set limits on rental housing. It's financing, development, and managing that, in effect, governments will own and operate most of the rental housing in the United States.
But recently, there's been a major event that occurred that will absolutely accelerate the coming of the Great Reset. And no, this isn't speculation, this isn't theory. This actually happened a few months back, and a lot of the research shows that this may actually happen here in the United States sooner rather than later. Now, if at this point you've been living under a rock, or if your last name's Biden and you simply have no idea what's going on,
90% of the time I have no idea what the I'm talking about.
The Great Reset is an agenda by the World Economic Forum to pretty much reset our entire global economy to be more centralized and controlled by the world's elites. With the tagline in which everyone has heard by now, you will own nothing and you will be happy.
What the hell is even that?
Now, speaking of you will own nothing, a big aspect of the Great Reset is that we will literally own nothing. Which of course, if we don't own it, then, well, brings the question, who will? And the obvious answer is most likely those who are pushing for the Great Reset to happen. The elites, the ones who control our government. And well, what do you know? That's exactly what happened recently. Late last year, voters in Berlin actually voted for apartments that are owned by private developers to be seized by government entities. Honestly, when I first saw this article and others like it, the first words that came to my mouth was, well, it's continuing to happen. Another big step for the Great Reset. And what's really sad is the wave of American citizens on Twitter, which we all know is the prime intellectual platform of the world, supporting this, saying that major cities in the US, such as San Francisco and New York, should start adopting this as soon as possible. Now, before talking about how this may potentially reach us here in the United States, let me be the first to tell you that this will never work. As a matter of fact, you can go back hundreds of years and you can see that any time government entities have tried sticking their hand in to solve the housing problem by seizing private property, it's gone bad almost every single time. Millions, sometimes billions of dollars are lost, and worst of all, the people that they're actually trying to help actually end up in worse situations than they originally started in. A great example of this is New York's public housing system, which actually began in the 1930s. And well, it represents one of the world's largest public housing government-owned institutions. And considering that it houses over 400,000 low-income individuals, representing 1 out of 14 New Yorkers, well, I would say that's a pretty good sample size. Now, without getting too much into this, here's a quick snapshot of what the last 90 years of the New York public housing structure has been like. Almost every building has had reports of multiple instances of rats, mold, broken water heaters, leaks, faulty elevators, cracked sidewalks, and the list goes on and on and on. According to the Washington Post, who ran a study on the New York public housing system, the average age of the system's buildings is over 60, yet deferred maintenance is so bad, barring dramatic change, some 90% of the system's units will no longer be functional by the year 2027. Not to mention, it's estimated that it will take the city $31.8 billion over the next 5 years to fix the hole that they dug themselves in since the 1930s. At one point, the ultra-progressive mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, actually faced a lawsuit which involved him and other officials running this New York public housing system to tell and train their staff on how to cover up their actions, and also how to mislead federal inspectors and present false reports to the government and to the public about its compliance and lead paint regulations. So honestly, that's where I believe Berlin is headed, by seizing private properties from developers and putting them under government control. At least that's what history tells us. And by the way, in going into the bit of the details on what's happening in Berlin, approximately 250,000 units of apartment buildings are being seized by government entities, which I can tell you, it represents billions of dollars worth of real estate. Which, hey, I mean, who knows? Maybe everything will work out, everything will be awesome, and we'll all be singing Kumbaya around the shrine of Klaus Schwab. Now, for us to understand how it could potentially happen here in the United States, well, we first have to grasp why it's happening in Berlin first. And really, amongst all the reasons as to why they're doing what they're doing, the one that stands out the most is rent being too high and unaffordable. Which, by the way, I wonder where else are people saying that?
I represent the rent is too damn high party.
Now, the belief amongst the Berlin voters who voted this in is that governments need to seize these properties so that the rent can become affordable. Which, on a side note, my brother and I have owned 8 figures worth of real estate, a lot of them being apartment buildings, and I'll be sharing my 2 cents on this later in this video. But in talking about how this may happen in the United States, well, we're currently on the doorsteps of it happening right now. Because according to the Washington Post, we've seen rent jump as high as 30% year over year in certain major cities. And unfortunately, wages have not been able to keep up with these big rent increases throughout the country. And the sad part is that it looks like it's not getting any better anytime soon because, well, according to the National Multifamily Housing Council, the US needs to build an average of 328,000 new apartments every year by 2030, and we've only hit that mark 3 times since 1989. Not to mention that the total shortage of rental homes now stand at 6.8 million, according to the Low Income Housing Coalition. So with shortages in both the single-family housing market and also the apartment market, well, it looks like rents aren't going to go down anytime soon. And well, what this means is that it's going to put a lot of pressure on governments to start instituting rent control more often throughout the country. I mean, as a matter of fact, even some cities in Florida are starting to see a bigger push for rent control. And folks, it's Florida. And if you really think about it, the step right after rent control is exactly what's happening in Berlin right now. I mean, you got government seizing private property, and right below that, it's rent control, as in governments dictating how much landlords can charge for rent. So with that happening in Germany and Canada pretty much on their way to adopting a whole social credit system.
Admiration I actually have for China.
And oh, speaking of which, recently there have been reports published by subgroups of Canadian politicians that are pushing not only for social credit, but also rental economy. Which is pretty much another way of saying you will own nothing and you will be happy. So with all this happening with countries around the world, my big question is, well, how long before it reaches here in our doorstep in the United States? I mean, the elite and the government will always look to expand their power by claiming it's for the greater good. I mean, whether it's Canada or Germany or even the United States. Well, I guess not Russia anymore. Alright, so here's my 2 cents on all this. At the end of the day, Berlin voters voted for governments to seize private property mainly to slow down and stop rents from going up. Now, do I think that the average Berlin voter or government official knows a lot about economics and housing? Definitely not. However, I do agree with him on the end result. At the end of the day, there should be affordable housing options for everyone who at least are trying to create a life for themselves. But if you want to solve the problem with rent being too high, well, it's simple. Make it easier for real estate developers to build housing that's desperately needed right now. Now, at this point, I'm sure there's a lot of people who may say, hey man, that's just trickle-down economics, man. That doesn't work. It only works for the big giant corporations, and they always want less regulation, man. Which, by the way, I'm not saying less regulation. Regulation is important. We want to make sure that the structures that are being produced and developed are sound, are structured, and are safe for everyone to be able to live in. What I am saying, however, is offer incentives. Make the process easier for people to be able to go through. I mean, between buying the land and putting the shovel on the ground to start building, on average, it takes about 2 to 3 years for that process to even occur. Between zoning, all the studies that you have to get done, the permits, I mean, that's a lot of work that has to be done, and even zoning itself can sometimes be a 6 to 9 month process. There have been certain cases where I've developed properties and I had to wait for an actual hearing, and the next hearing wasn't for 3 to 4 months. And after having gone through these processes myself, I could tell you that a lot of it is just really difficult and unnecessary and very timely and overall inefficient. And by the way, this is not trickle-down economics. If anything, it's more so side to side, because looking at it from the basics of free market principles, well, the more units there are, the lower the price of rent is going to be. It's basic supply and demand. You're utilizing competition to lower down costs for the everyday consumer. And again, we're not sacrificing regulation or quality, we're simply making the process more efficient for real estate developers to actually start developing and building. All I'm saying is work together, because at the end of the day, it's going to help the people. Now, a lot of people may also say that this is going to make the big corporations or the big real estate developers richer. Well, no, not necessarily, because, well, if there's more units in place and rent is going down, the developer is actually making less money. Now, as a real estate developer and entrepreneur myself, let me tell you why I would take that deal 9 times out of 10. Simply because, well, the more units there are, sure, the rent goes down, but it's more of a guarantee that I'm going to make money. If there's an area that rent is going higher and higher and higher, well, it means there's a lot of demand. And well, when there's a lot of demand, I want to bring in the supply. Therefore, more of a guarantee that I'll make money. Now, is it less money? Sure, but it's guaranteed, and I'll take safety over profit any day of the week. So overall, my 2 cents is, if you want to lower the cost of rent, you want to increase affordable housing for everyone, make it easier for real estate developers to build more housing that people desperately need. Make it more efficient and also offer incentives so that real estate developers and government and municipalities can actually work together. Now, will all this happen? Probably not. And it kind of drives me crazy that the big decision makers in government typically have zero knowledge in terms of what they're actually making decisions on. I mean, that's like a conversation between 2 people going like, hey, John, do you know anyone that has really good dating advice? Oh yeah, totally. You should talk to my cousin Jeff. He's got a black belt in karate. Or like, hey, we've got a pandemic on our hands. Who should we listen to? Ooh, how about the guy that makes computers?
You know, I'm very proud of what we've done.
Now, of course, what's happening in Berlin is actually happening across Europe, some places in Canada, and of course may end up happening here in the United States. So with that said, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What do you guys think about what's happening in Berlin? Do you think it's going to happen in America? Do governments have the right to be able to do this? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. And of course, like this video, and if you want to see more content like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel. So with that said, thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.